Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming out this rainy morning. Let's hope the temperature stays the same. I guess we could use the water. The main thing is to get rid of that temperature. That was horrible for a few days. Would you all stand for a moment to give the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Would anybody care to volunteer to give the invocation this morning? No volunteers. All right.
Thank God. That's good.
But no? Okay, let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that thou hast brought to us. We thank you for the friends and neighbors we have that work with us as we perform stewardship toward our nation. We look forward to the new day and the days that follow with a strong heart, the confidence that you will be with us, give us the strength, the perseverance, and the wisdom that we need to see our nation through these hard times and to pass on to another generation the blessings that we have had. Amen. Nancy, I think you're our elected official today.
Your token elected official today.
And also our candidate for the day.
Your token candidate for the day, too.
How's everything looking for your...
It's looking good. My opponent is coming back into the States this week, so that's a bad thing.
Right.
So he'll be campaigning, but y'all remember the name Abbott in November. I should do just fine.
Right, I think so. Who is your opponent, or should we... Who is your opponent, or should we even mention his name?
We don't mention his name.
Oh, okay. We'll not mention his name.
No free votes.
Yeah, for me when he votes.
Okay, that's good. All right, do we have any new people here with us for the first time? No, we got to work on that. Start getting some more new members in. Maybe we need to do some mailings. I'll skip the usual part about what we're at, what we're like, and etc. Let me just recap a couple of things going on today. Today the Frosts are down in Columbus for the quarterly meeting of the Ohio Liberty Council. Normally I would be there, but they changed the meeting time from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 to 2. So the Frosts are down there representing Abigail Adams and McFan. The other thing that was pretty interesting this week was Jim Renacci put out an emergency call. Progress Ohio was planning a big demonstration in front of his office to make a big issue about his standing strong against the debt ceiling. So he put out an emergency alert, wanted some people to show up. That's pretty tough for us because we're not government employees. We can't take the day off. We're not college students. We can't just, most of the people are working, etc., and the ones that aren't working are unemployed and can't go chasing off everywhere. But anyway, we ended up outnumbering them 3 to 1.
Were you there?
Big Bird? It wasn't that big. I think they had about 11 of them, about 35 of us, not counting the kids we had up there being babysat by Renee's staff. It was pretty amusing, and we had some very short discussions with the people there. They were all about the rich paying, and we invited them to get Warren Buffett he's a billionaire, write out a check. If he doesn't feel like he's paying enough, get a checkbook out, do it. And they were into this thing about gotta tax the rich more and all the talking points you hear and see with the liberals. Our line was pretty much what we say. Taxed enough already. It's not a debt problem or It's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. We can't afford a debt hike, etc. So it was a pretty good day. There was only one reporter there, and at the end of the day, there was no embarrassment for Nacy, and he was very encouraged that we were able to respond. Yeah, Chuck?
What was kind of the makeup of these 11 people or so? Were they, I had expected it would be the traditional left-wing, pay them, feed them, bus them in for free, you know, kind of thing. Was it that? I mean, I was surprised when you said 11. I would have thought they would have, you know, gone through the winos, handed them $20 a piece, you know, a bottle of 4 roses and put them on a bus.
Well, it was very interesting composition. The one that was in charge was up from Columbus. I don't know why they can't find somebody local. There was a black man and his son. The rest of them were white.
That's right.
I don't recall any of them being senior citizens, which, you know, a lot of us are. There were a couple of young college-age types, but most of them were in the middle and appeared to be union employees.
Probably.
So that's pretty much what we thought about. And they had some very illegible signs. I guess during Jim Renacy's recent town hall, he handed out red and green cards to help manage the interaction with the audience. And some of them had red poster boards that they marked on for their signs. I'll tell you, ink gets lost in the background of red. I got up with close to 10 feet and I still couldn't read what they wrote on their sign. So, yeah, well.
They won't do that again.
No, I don't think they'll do that again. It's kind of like the batch elder demonstrations. They've pretty much lost every time they've tried that. So I think they're going to stop doing it, which is great because I hate reacting to, you know, things like that on the spur of the moment. Anyway, and looking ahead, I think most people are aware of the petition drive that's been going on forever, 15 months or whatever, and it's over now, thank goodness. 426,000 validated signatures. That's more than 10% more than needed. So I don't think they're going to waste any money on trying to litigate. I mean, 1 or 2%, absolutely they would. But more than 10%, I wouldn't if I was them. That would be a waste of money. What's interesting to me was that before we turned in the signatures, we had 3 different efforts to validate the signatures and turned out in the high 80s. Well, at the end, it ended up being 77% statewide. And I'm saying, wait, how did we drop 10%? And apparently a lot of people had changed their address but didn't update the Board of Elections. And the overwhelming majority of signatures that were invalidated were because of that. We didn't even have that on our instruction sheet to, you know, check and ask them if they were, if their address was current, etc. But we'll have to file that one away for future reference in case we ever do this again. Anyway, it's all done. A campaign committee has been formed. Yes, Donna?
They haven't finished counting them all yet. I mean, validating them all, have they?
They have.
Oh, they have.
Yesterday was,
They still have some left. Okay.
no, yesterday was the final day, and they've got them all. Now they go to the Secretary of State, and he essentially, officially puts it on the ballot. Chuck, I had a question.
I was just scratching my head.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's go on to the guest speaker then. Matt Mayer's joined us today. The Buckeye Institute is a fountain of information on public employment, unions, and etc. And now that we're done with the petitions, our top priority is to support the balanced CASIC budget and one of its cornerstones, Senate Bill 5. That's going to be the lightning rod going forward. So the more we can learn about the public employees, the unions, and etc., the better off we're going to be, especially going into the Medina County Fair a week from now with our theme, Spin versus Truth. We're going to try to show both sides of the coin, what the unions are saying and what we say. And while we're about it, with this debt ceiling debate going on in Washington, we can do that too. Cover the media spin, the White House spin versus the truth. For example, we take in $200 billion a month from taxpayers. If you pay our debt service, national defense, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, take all the hostages away, you still end up with $40 billion left to take care of everything else. There is no reason why we should go into default or short our seniors. That too. Okay, without more.
Speaking of fair, our fair ad will start running Monday, full week plus the fair.
Great.
2 weeks of that.
Fabulous. And Dick, what time do we, it was on Sunday, was it?
The building opens at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, and we'll have till 10 o'clock that night to set up, and everything must be in place at 8 o'clock Monday morning.
Okay. And the earlier we get there, the more likely we are to get a good space.
Yes,
Okay, so we should plan to be there at 8 a.m. Sunday morning?
Sunday morning.
Okay. Let us know if you plan to be there with us. I will plan to be there at 8 a.m. on Sunday. Okay, without further ado, I would like to bring up our guest speaker and welcome Matt.
Good morning. How are you today? Everyone can hear me okay? Oh, good. Well, thank you for the wonderful opportunity to speak for this group. I always enjoy getting in front of patriots. It's the best group of people, obviously, to ever spend time in front of. This is the 150th anniversary of the start of the Civil War, so I thought it would be appropriate to reflect on the state of America and Ohio and inject a little bit of history into your morning, so bear with me. Although it may become somewhat cliche to say, I truly believe we are in a transformational period of American history. From the financial crisis that remains ever present, to the growing instability across the globe, to the rising dysfunction in our urban centers, we face challenges that could, if we fail to answer them, portend the beginning of the end of John Winthrop's City on a Hill. As historian Niall Ferguson correctly noted in Empire at the Edge of Chaos, the historical parallel between America's current fiscal crisis and those of Great Britain, the Netherlands, and Rome, shortly before those empires began to decline, is perilously close. In many ways, we must do what few, if any, countries have ever successfully done, which is to unring the bell that has rung. As our policymakers, with one hand, remove more and more Americans from the tax rolls, and with the other hand, make more and more Americans dependent upon government, and with a third invisible hand, increase the number and cost of government workers, a tyranny of the majority is arising that will have little interest in paying their fair share or losing their piece of the pie. Because mathematically there is more of them than there is of us, the odds of unringing that bell grow slimmer every day. In fact, a little-known historian from Scotland named Alexander Tytler has something to say about these odds. Tytler was a devout student of history and politics at the University of Edinburgh. He spent his life studying and teaching about government. Here's what Tytler observed about democracies back in the early 1800s. Quote, "A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by dictatorship." Do Tytler's observations on democracy sound at all familiar? What Tytler describes in many ways is what history teaches us about the fall of Rome, when Rome's leaders pandered to the masses with more bread and circuses. As Rome had to extend ever outward to sustain the burden of the public dole, it rotted from within and served as easy prey to the Goths. Rome fell with a whimper, not a bang. Tyler developed what he saw as the cycle of democracy. I'm sure you've heard of it. He describes the cycle in the following manner. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. During those 200 years, these nations always progressed through the following sequence. From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and from dependence back into bondage. It seems clear from the various economic data that we face very steep challenges. Here are some key points. Entitlement spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, along with the national debt, will swallow up all federal revenues by 2040. By 2060, nearly 100% of all federal tax revenue will go to serving just our debt. Nearly 50% of Americans don't pay federal income taxes. Almost 50% of Americans receive a transfer payment from government. The top 25% in the U.S., making around $67,000, make a clear majority of income, 67% of it, but also pay a far greater share of taxes, 86%. As the bottom 50% earn 13% of income, but pay only 3% of taxes. Ohio has the 18th highest state and local tax burden and the 5th worst business environment. The 23% of Ohio households that earn over $60,000 earn 67% of income, pay 81% of state income taxes. From 1990 to 2011, Ohio's general revenue expenditure in the state budget grew by about 144%, or 42% more than inflation. It averaged about 2% more than inflation over the course of 21 years. In 74 counties in Ohio, the median household income declined from 2008 to 2009, in some counties as much as 16%. Every single Ohio county lost private sector jobs from 2008 to 2009, with Clinton County losing over 28%. In 87 out of 88 counties, federal workers make more on average than their private sector neighbors, substantially more. In 83 out of 88 counties, state workers make more on average than their private sector neighbors, and in 69 out of 88 counties, local workers make more on average than their private sector neighbors. I could go on, but the picture seems clear that America today stands somewhere between that apathy and dependence route. We see this dependence on government in decay more vividly in places like Ohio. At one time, Ohio was America's strongest state. So what happened? I would submit to you that the strengths and weaknesses of Ohio are directly correlated to the amount of economic freedom possessed by its citizens and the burden of government. Again, let's look back in history to get a sense of this strength as it related to economic freedom. In 1853, the New York Times dispatched Frederick Law Olmsted, future architect of Central Park, to travel around the South and send back observations about it. Olmsted wrote his dispatches from the South over the next 2 years. His columns later became a book titled The Cotton Kingdom, A Traveler's Observations on Cotton and Slavery in the American Slave States, first published 150 years ago in 1861. Because Olmsted spent so much time in the South, staying in the hotels and homes of Southerners, both rich and poor, and using the roads, rivers, and rails extensively, his observations provide us with a valuable snapshot in time. One of the most striking observations Olmsted made was the enormous economic and infrastructure difference between the northern manufacturing states and the southern agrarian states. Of the North, Olmsted noted a traveler would find, quote, a private room where I could, in the first place, wash off the dust of the road and make some change of clothing before being admitted to a family apartment. This family room would be curtained and carpeted and glowing softly with the light of burnt candles or a shaded lamp. When I entered it, I could expect that a couch or an armchair and a fragrant cup of tea with refined sugar and wholesome bread of wheaten flour leavened would be offered me. I should expect, as a matter of course, a clean, sweet bed where I could sleep alone and undisturbed until possibly in the morning a jug of hot water should be placed at my door. On the South, Olmsted observed that a traveler would find 9 out of 10 times I slept in a room with others, in a bed which stank. I washed with utensils common to the whole household. I found no garden, no flowers, no fruit, no tea, no cream, no sugar, no bread, no curtains, no lifting windows, or no couch. If one reclined in the family room, it was on the bare floor, for there were no carpets or mats. The house swarmed with vermin. In the South, for 9/10 of the citizens, comfortable homes as the words would be understood by the mass of citizens in the North are, under present arrangements, out of the question. Without a doubt, the locus of economic power and freedom in the 1850s resided in the manufacturing North. Recall, it was to Ohio that the runaway slaves in Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly, so desperately tried to reach. In 1861, the North had twice as many people as the South. It had more than 2 times the miles of railroad track and nearly 5 times the number of factories. Those factories employed nearly 10 times as many workers. The North produced more corn and had twice as many horses. Despite the weather advantage, the South, including Texas, only had 1.6 million more beef cattle than the North. This concentration of economic power remained geographically fixed in the North for the next 100 years. In that time, Ohio became the land of 7 U.S. presidents, though the last in 1923. Ohio became the land of Edison, Firestone, Rockefeller, and Wright, American titans that spawned the modern corporation in the early 1900s, and whose technological advances we still use today. Beginning in the 1970s, however, this concentration of power began to slowly dissipate, as the North found itself increasingly unable to compete with the South and West and foreign markets due to higher labor costs, increased tax and government cost burdens, and greater workplace rigidity. The South and West have replaced the North, from Missouri to Maine, as the center of America's economic growth, innovation, and prosperity. It took more than 100 years, but ironically, the locus of economic freedom and prosperity today is the very place where America's most shameful practice, slavery, took place and where freedom was wholly lacking. By 2011, this year, the names Edison, Firestone, Rockefeller, and Wright have been replaced by Jobs, Smith, Gates, and Walton. Their companies surpassed by Apple, FedEx, Microsoft, and Walmart. In just the last 20 years, Ohio companies on the Fortune 500 list has shrunk by half. And people follow the same migration pattern. The 2010 census figures bear out this fact. In 1980, the Northeast and the Midwest possessed 22% and 25% of the U.S. population. The West and South possessed 19% and 34%. 30 years later, both the Northeast and the Midwest have population growth of roughly 13.5%, as the West had an enormous increase of 66% and the South surged by 52%. The share of U.S. population in the Northeast and Midwest went from nearly 50% in 1980 down to 40% by 2010. If these trends continue over the next 30 years, the cliche about the last person in Ohio remembering to turn off the lights just might be true. Most pointedly, the southern and western migration is best illustrated by the loss of 47 electoral votes since 1972 from the North, comprising the states of Illinois to Maine, which saw their electoral power decline from 221 votes to 174 votes, a 21% loss of power. Except for the last 2 years, since 1964, America's elected president has come from the South or West. In 1943, the average wealth in Ohio was 13% above the national average. Today, we are 11% below the national average. In terms of jobs, since January 1990, Ohio has netted just 215,000 jobs in the private sector, which is the 46th worst in America, behind the other northern states of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Michigan, New Jersey, and New York. The pro-union North experienced less than half the job growth, 11%, from 1990 to today, even after the large losses in the South and West due to the housing market collapse, than those states in the South that protect the economic freedom of worker, which has grown 34% on average. The top 5 job-producing states in the last 21 years are all states that protect the economic freedom of workers. In contrast, the bottom 15 states are all northern forced unionization states that form a block from Missouri to Maine, including Hawaii and the left coast of California. Despite having nearly 60 million more people, forced unionization states netted 4 million fewer jobs than worker freedom states. Think about that number for a moment. The rank-and-file workers in the North, including in Ohio, have been left holding a fairly empty bag, given that there is little the union can do for them when there are no jobs. And contrary to the talking points of the anti-free trade left, the jobs did not get shipped overseas to cheap labor markets like China and India. Rather, many jobs have been lost or shipped down to the more business-friendly South and West, as well as replaced by technological productivity gains. Ohio today simply manufactures more with fewer workers. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that in the last 10 years, roughly 20 companies, most recently NCR, moved from Ohio to just the Atlanta area. The article noted that companies, quote, have been heading to the Sun Belt for decades to take advantage of the balmy weather, tax breaks, and non-union workers. Ohio cannot increase the share of sunlight as we saw this morning, or warm weather, although we're getting more of that. But Ohio's elected officials certainly can get their heads out of the sand regarding Ohio's 18th highest total tax burden and structurally weak labor market. If Ohio wants to regain its status as the economic powerhouse, it must free its entrepreneurs and businesses from the burdens of high taxes, cost of government, and pro-union policies. With a vibrant private sector, prosperity will return to Ohio, and the revenue generated will allow us to fund necessary government services. We can pretend that these things don't matter, but Olmsted rightly noted in 1861 that more freedom means more prosperity. In fact, in what must be one of the greatest of ironies in American history, exactly 150 years after the beginning of the Civil War on April 12, 1861, to free black Americans from the shackles of slavery, blacks are now fleeing the North to return south because it is where freedom and prosperity reign in America. As historian Walter Russell Mead recently wrote, most blacks of course still vote blue at the ballot box, but more and more of them are voting red at their feet. They are betting in massive numbers that Southern Republicans will do a better job of helping their kids get good educations, police their communities more fairly, offer more affordable housing, and create a better business climate. Ohio can fight the shift of people, business, and prosperity by implementing the right policies. Money, sadly, does not grow out back on the money tree, so we must acknowledge that each dollar taken out of the private sector is one less dollar that can be used to grow a business, invest in a company, or buy a good or service. If we refuse to scale back the cost of government at all levels, which means fewer services and government compensation